Well, we've heard a lot about the future, Canterbury's post-Quake economy, and our next speaker, Tom Hooper, is going to ask the question, is it a Rockstar or a Rockfall? Big hand, please.
First of all, I'm going to pose a statement. It's not whether it's a Rockstar or a Rockfall, because with 8% GDP, 3% unemployment, strong net migration, there's only one answer to that, which is it's a Rockstar. But what everybody needs to remember is Rockstars are incredibly flawed individuals. Jimi Hendrix, Axl Rose, and that's what we have. We have a Rockstar economy. We have incredible growth, we have incredible momentum, and we have some flaws. And if we're not careful, those flaws will lead to excess, which can see us catch a little bit of a cold. So at CDC, what we focus on is what are the long-term impacts of the recovery. We're going to get a $40 billion stimulus. Roughly $26 billion of that will come from outside the country in terms of insurance proceeds. That is not once in a lifetime, it is just a once impact of stimulus. So the important bit is not the next 5 years of the recovery, but is the 50 years after that, the 75 years after that. What we build now determines the future shape of our city. So the fact that we're in a rockstar economy now is wonderful. Are we going to be the Rolling Stones and still going in 50 years' time, or are we going to be Britney Spears? Okay. First of all, the good. I mean, goodness, we do a good job of beating ourselves up, guys. And internationally, that's probably what I hear from all the guys that come and see us, from Boston, from Harvard, from international disaster study groups, saying, gee, you guys are tough on yourself. And we are. So we should celebrate some of the things we've done really well. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, most people are safe. Most people are warm. Most people have access to basic hygiene. We've got a plan to rebuild our hospital. We've got a plan to rebuild our education system, and they are both enormous investments. We've got a plan and Crown investment to rebuild our university, which is one of the 3 fundamental building blocks in the city for the economy. So we've done some really, really good things. We have 8% GDP growth. That's going to continue for the next 4 to 5 years as the rebuild really picks up momentum. So we've got some things we should be celebrating. Right? But everything isn't perfect. And actually it never has been and never will be. In an event this complicated and in an event this complex, we'll never get everything right. And history tells us that. So you go to all of the international disaster recovery studies, and they will all say to you, you burn out your leadership. People are always frustrated because no matter how well you do, there are some things that are never quite perfect. And that's absolutely true in Christchurch. So if we focus on the good, this is a GDP graph where the red and green lines are Christchurch and Canterbury GDP, and the dark line down the bottom is New Zealand GDP. So normal situation, those lines are closely coupled. So Christchurch and Canterbury GDP has been very similar to New Zealand's. What we've seen as the earthquake rebuild stimulus has come in is our local economy has decoupled from the national economy. We now have a fundamentally different driver to the rest of the nation, and we have to understand that and we have to plan for the impacts of it, because the rebuild growth is actually adding 1% to national GDP at the moment. So that blue line that ticks up at the bottom, if you took the rebuild curve out of that, it would be a lot smaller uptick. We have different stimulus here. This is interesting, and this is actually really important in the next 12 months or so, 12 months to 2 years. So unemployment in Christchurch and Canterbury is now around 3%. Unemployment for working age males in the region is now at 2%. We have as close as you are ever going to get and hold to full employment in the region. We have to start looking at what the impacts of that are, and what are the ways that we can mitigate some of those things. And I'll come on to ways to mitigate in just a minute. The risk to the economy at the moment is that with full employment, we start to cannibalise some of our key long-term sectors for the rebuild. So the risk that a dairy worker picks up a hammer, that a blue-collar manufacturing floor worker picks up a hammer because they can make more money is very real. You will have all seen the article in the press about bus drivers. It's really difficult to get bus drivers at the moment because they get paid $45,000 a year, and truck drivers get paid $60,000. Those are the things that, with the unemployment levels that we have now, are going to start becoming more and more apparent in the rebuild. You'll hear Peter Townsend talk about how far through the rebuild we are. We're not at the peak yet. These things are going to get worse. The only solution is a larger workforce, right? And that can mean training, and it can mean bringing more people up to speed, but there's a lag in that. It means migration. It means we need more people from out of the region, and given the strong state of the rest of the New Zealand economy, from outside of New Zealand into the rebuild. And what I would like to say is, just very quietly in the background, MB have done a wonderful job with immigration. They've been very flexible. They've looked at the recovery. It's an example of a government ministry and department actually getting things right. And I'll talk more a little bit about where migration is up to in a minute. We also need to start looking at some other things. So I mentioned male unemployment numbers. We need to start looking at how do we get working mums back into the workforce. How do we start tapping into some of the over 65 wisdom that's in our economy but currently not in our workforce. So there's a bunch of innovative tactics that we need to be looking to employ in the workforce sector to try and give ourselves a little bit more capability and capacity. Okay, this is just a great story. So this is statistics around migration. And if you look at the two red lines, which are the earthquakes, and you can see that actually for some considerable time after that, unsurprisingly, departures were higher than arrivals, and we had a little bit of net flight out of the city. Since September 2012, that has reversed really strongly, and that trend continues. So we have strong net migration into the region. We need it to continue, and we need it to grow. What that means for dear old conservative Christchurch is that it needs to get over itself, and it needs to become a multicultural society and be more welcoming of different ethnic groups that we need to come here. And guys, the eyes of the world are on us. We cannot be seen to exploit international workers, and there's a little bit of risk floating around that just at the moment. Okay, the challenge. I think we have to realise that the events of the earthquakes damaged the principal assets of most ratepayers. They don't care about anything else. So we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're a homeowner and your entire life savings are tied up in your house, you don't care about the CBD rebuild plan. You don't care about anything other than, when is my house getting fixed? What is my equity position? You can see it on stuff. You look at the comments that are posted on articles on just about any topic in Christchurch, and within the top three always will be, when's my house getting fixed? So we have to accept that. We have to understand that people's priorities are based around their principal asset. And I think it's clear that this thing is taking longer than everybody thought it would do, is going to continue to take more time than everybody thought it would do, and that is going to place an awful lot of stress on the community. So the clear prioritisation and communication of that program, which I know everybody is focused on anyway, needs to be emphasised. Okay, there is another challenge that's emerged just recently with regard to housing, and that is Christchurch rents. This is a a particularly interesting statistic. So the green line is average Christchurch rents, and you can see that over time, from 2005, it's consistently tracked below the national average. And since the earthquakes, average rents in Christchurch have risen 43% and are trending upwards. So that trend graph, if you look at the dotted line, is actually accelerating. That gives the lower socio-economic groups in Christchurch a significant challenge. So affordable housing, the ability to look after our vulnerable, and having the right solutions in place for this are an absolutely pressing topic. This, by the way, is going to get significantly worse. We're going to have net migration, we're going to continue to bring people into the population, and there's a housing stock lag. So we expect this situation to deteriorate a little. Just to highlight the complexity of it, in the long term, because of that, there's a risk that we overbuild. So let me just explain just very briefly. If we have 10,000 migrants come in for the rebuild, they probably need somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 houses. Now, if we say that's actually only the temporary part of the workforce that we're okay with leaving, there's 4,000 extra houses. We also have 8,000 houses that have to be basically rebuilt over the next 4 years. So that's another 2,000 houses a year that are required to house those homeowners while their places are rebuilt. On top of that, we have another 24,000 houses with more than $100,000 worth of damage that are also due to be repaired over the next 4 years. That's another 3,000 houses. So if we don't get it right, we're going to build somewhere in the region of 10,000 houses more than the current population of Christchurch needs. So let me explain what that means. It can be good in that actually, if we get the rebuild right, and this is a fantastic place to live, we've built the growth stock for the city that we will need, and that will be sucked up by gradually increasing demand. If we stall, if we take too long, we risk a little bit of a shock to the housing market, because we'll have an oversupply of houses that will be rented out predominantly to people in the temporary rebuild, and if they leave and there's no market for those houses, given the fact that a lot of them are build to rents, there's a little bit of a long-term risk to the housing market. We are talking to Treasury and the Reserve Bank about exactly this, and there are a number of groups in the city looking at what is the answer to both temporary accommodation and permanent, affordable accommodation. And I would suggest that in this there need to be some changes to the supply chain and some changes to the cost base of that supply chain. Potentially things like modular housing. Okay. It's really hard to work out actually what's earthquake impact and actually what's real economy. So I will just go straight to this graph and talk to this to finish off. We've got a couple of indicators that we use to try and track the real economy as opposed to earthquake impacts. And I think the important thing to notice is if you look at it doesn't show up there. If you look at the red line, that represents actually an unsuccessful recovery in a long-term economy that stagnates. Even in that situation, there is strong growth over this period because of the stimulus that's being injected into the economy. So what you have to try and work out, it's very difficult in this first initial period, is actually are we on the red line, are we on the green line, or are we on the purple line? We can actually say with some confidence that actually we're pretty much on the green line, maybe trending towards the purple line at the moment. And there's a reason for that, which is that actually there's very strong stimulus in the underlying economy. The rural sector is booming, the tech sector is booming. So the latest Department of Statistics numbers that came out was that there had been a 43% increase in the number of FTEs in the tech sector in Christchurch in the last 12 months. So those are sectors that are not earthquake and rebuild impacted that are showing very strong growth. So I think we have some pretty strong reasons to be positive about our Rockstar economy. But we just have to be careful around some of the flaws that are apparent and how we manage those. I'm going to finish with roughly 30 seconds left on the clock, Lyle. And if anybody's got maybe a question, Rob?
Keep it to the end of the project, I think.
Okay, we'll keep it to the end of the project. So thank you all very much.
No, last word.
Oh, sorry? Oh,
Have your last word.
okay, so I can take a question.
Very quick one, please.
That's pretty quickly. Like, I definitely understand what you're saying about the housing market and the increased pressure on demand. But do you see in this transitional period any mechanisms that could be put in place to potentially help those people in low socioeconomic areas that are struggling with increased rent and so forth?
Yeah, look, I do. I think there's a number of mechanisms that can be put in place, and I think we have to accept the public good element of some of those. So it's probably a combination of ministry, stroke central government and local government, and those conversations are going on at the moment. So I'd expect to see some new solutions emerge.